In this video, we'll continue our discussion of the behavior of the patch function. We'll show what it does when it's replaying. In the last video, we showed what it does when it's executing the original time and not replaying. So this time, we'll talk about what happens when it's replaying. Okay? So here's the behavior. So if replaying and the code has a call to patched, then this stuff happens. If the patch ID is somewhere in the event history, then we're in one of these four scenarios. If the patch ID is nowhere in the event history, then we are in a totally different scenario, and we'll discuss that in the next video. And this is actually where the caveat comes in that was in the first video, okay? So here we'll focus on these four cases, okay? So we're replaying, the code has a call to patched, the patch ID is somewhere in the event history, okay? So that's this stuff. All right, so now we're in let's look at this first scenario. Okay, so if the event is after where we currently are in the history, then in other words, our patch is before the event, that means our patch is too early. It will attempt to write a marker to the replay event history, but it will throw a non-deterministic error or exception because the replay and the original event histories don't match. Okay, so this is if we put our patch to call too early in the replay. And so that will throw an NDE. This scenario is if we put our patch call too late. Okay, so if the event is before where we currently are in the execution and there hasn't been a call to patched with that ID yet, then it won't even get there because an NDE would have already been thrown where the patched call was in the original execution. Okay, so too early, too late. Third scenario. So if the event history is where we currently are in the event history, then this is the good scenario. Too early, too late, just right. It will return true and add a marker to the replay event history, which means it will match the original event history and it will continue. So it won't throw an NDE, it'll return true and it'll be good to go. So this is similar to the behavior of the non-replay case, which we talked about in the first video. Basically what that means is the first time it sees it, or the first time the execution sees that call to patch with that ID, it will write it to the event history, return true, and keep going. Okay. All right, then the last scenario is if the event is before where we currently are in the execution, meaning the replay has already seen a call to patch with that ID, meaning it's already been called once, we're calling it again. So in a way you can think of it as too late, but it's not too late because it's already happened once. Then it will just return true and not do anything to the replay event history. And again, this is really similar to the case we talked about in the last video, right? It behaves really similarly to what you're doing if you're not replaying, because if it already has the marker in the event history, it'll just won't do anything to the event history and it'll return true again. Okay, so let's see what happens with some code. All right, so instead of this patch statement, I'm going to go grab a little snippet here. Boom. Okay. And so now what does this do? So all we're doing is we're sleeping for 10 seconds, right? And really the reason we're doing that is just to add something to our event history. Okay. And then we're calling our patched function. And then we've got a couple more sleeps. It doesn't really matter how many of these we do. But just so we have a little breathing room so we can kill the worker if we need to, and to add events to the history if we need to. Okay. So let's go ahead and run this. So we'll run here, okay. Now I'll refresh over here and let's take a look at our workflow. Okay, we're gonna wait for this to finish. So we're in our first sleep and then we're gonna hit our patched, right? Boom, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna kill our worker. All right, so where are we so far in the code? We are here. Okay, so we've got the first sleep, our first call to patched, and our second call to sleep. Okay, so let's simulate this first scenario. Okay, so if the event is after where we currently are, then in other words, our patch call is before the event and our patch is too early. So we could do that by just moving this up one. So now it's too early. Okay, so if we run this, we're going to get an NDE. Okay, so let's go ahead and try to run our worker. Boom, NDE. All right. And so what that's saying is our replay event history has a patch statement before the first timer, okay? And that doesn't match. So that's scenario one, we get an NDE. All right, scenario 2 is if our call to patch is too late, and that means we never even get to the call to patch because it would have already thrown an NDE, right? So let's simulate that. Let's move this down here. Boom. Okay, so the original call was here, right? And you can see that in the event history too, right? So we've got our first timer, our marker, and then our second timer, okay? So putting it here is the correct place. So if we put it here, we're too late. So we'll get an NDE here because it's going to try to set the second timer before it has seen a marker. Okay, so let's try it. Boom. We still have this NDE. It's a little anticlimactic. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I think we've got this error here. Maybe that was already there. I actually don't remember. But we're still getting an NDE. Okay. And that was kind of a little anticlimactic there, but because you couldn't see any change in the UI. Anyway, so that was scenario 2 in which we're too late. Number 3, this is the Goldilocks scenario. Okay. So let's move it back to the original location, and we won't get an NDE this time. And we'll know the execution is working well because right now we're here, right? We've got 2 timers in our event history. It's going to fire this third one. Okay. So it's going to do this one. It's going to say, okay, that's done. It's going to go here and say like, oh, okay, our replay event history matches the original. Then it's going to go here and sleep again. And then it's going to go here. Well, it already has slept, so it'll basically just skip over that. And then it'll come here and sleep again. Okay. So let's do it. Let's run it. Boom. Looking good. See, it started a new timer. Let's kill this workflow. And you see it got there because it didn't throw an NDE on this one. Okay, so that's this third scenario. That's this third scenario. Let's do the fourth one, okay? So this one right here, we can actually get by, actually our code is now here. So in this one, what we can do is really do, okay, so we want to make sure we're replaying. That's a good place for it. Yeah, okay. This is good. So, okay, so what am I thinking about? I'm debating between like putting this down here, but at that point it won't be replaying. So this would not be a good example of what I'm trying to show here. Okay, because we're talking about on replay. Okay, and actually if we would have put it down here, that would be like what we discussed in the first video, right? Because this is non-replay. All right, so back to work. So we've got this one in the correct location. This one is too late, but it has already had the marker added in the replay event history. So this one won't do anything and it won't throw an NDE. It'll just return true, right? So that's this. If the event is before where we currently are in the execution, meaning the replay has already seen a call to patched with this ID, which is right here, okay, then it will return true and not do anything to the replay event history. All right, so let's go ahead and do it. So it won't throw any issues. And right here, it started the fourth timer. Why did it do that? Because it did this one, already done. This, okay. This one, already done. This one is also okay because the marker's already there. It did this, but it's already done. Now it got to this timer and fired it. And now it actually just did this extra timer. So boom. We could actually just wait for like 10 more seconds and it'll complete the workflow. Lovely. Okay. So that is pretty good explanation of what happens with the patched function when we're replaying, and in particular, the patch ID is somewhere in the event history. Okay, so in what I think is going to be the final video, we'll talk about what happens when we're replaying, but the patch ID is not anywhere in the event history. Okay, alrighty, thanks.